Hey y'all, welcome back to another episode of Anchored Soul. I'm your host Allie and I'm so excited to be here with you guys tonight. Like I said in the last video, tonight I want to jump back into some Bible study with y'all. So I'm currently going through the Bible Project, which is a Bible in a Year program. This one in particular is by Tara Lee Cobble. And we just finished reading through the book of Job, I think either last week or 2 weeks ago. So it's kind of fresh on my mind, and I think that it's a story that is very important to talk about. So for those of you that don't know anything about the book of Job, I'm going to give you just like a quick little overview of it. And then kind of jump into what I have for us today. So Job is known as a upright and blameless man. He's a righteous man, and he has a healthy fear of God. And in the beginning of the story, we see Satan comes before God for some reason. I don't think that we're actually like given a reason for his being there, but God questions him and then brings up Job and says, "Have you thought about my servant Job?" And so Satan kind of challenges God and says, Job is this righteous man because you have blessed everything that he has done. So let me take that away from him. And basically, I bet I can turn him against you. And God agreed and said, you can have anything that says, but you cannot lay a finger on him. So Job loses his wealth, his livestock, his family. He had a wife and children, and his health. He ended up with, to me it sounds like leprosy, but the Bible doesn't call it leprosy, but it says sores all over his body, or at least my version doesn't call it leprosy. So Job is rightfully so pretty down in the dumps. He's trying to figure out what's going on, why all of this is, like his whole life has turned upside down basically. And he has these three friends that come on the scene. And at first they just sit with him and talk with him, or they just sit with him in silence. Actually, they don't talk. And that seems to go fine. And then they start talking. And basically they tell Job that all of this bad stuff has to be happening because of a sin that he has not repented for. And Job maintains his innocence. He, defends himself, and then he really wrestles with God and with the whole situation, and it ends up, the book is 42 chapters long. It ends up being that God restores everything that he had. And there are a few things about this book that I want to talk about. So the first one is, I think the book of Job it's a really powerful book. But at least for me, when I first read it, like the first couple times that I read it, it was a very confusing book. I wasn't really sure what was going on. It was just really hard for me to follow the dialogue. And some of the things his friends say to him, they claim that it is from like a revelation of sorts. So again, being a new reader of the story, before somebody explained it to me, I didn't understand that it wasn't actually like a revelation. What they were saying wasn't coming from God. So it just was really confusing to me. And it's a long book, I think, for what it is. It's just a lot of dialogue. But it's a very powerful book. So I think that this story in particular helps answer the question, why do bad things happen to good people? And I think that, I think sometimes they happen because, I think they happen for a lot of reasons, right? I think that in this particular case, though, they happen because there's something to be learned from these bad situations. We've all had things happen in our lives that, looking back on it from a more mature standpoint, or maybe not even more mature, but just past it, right? Like we've overcome it, we've moved past it, and our life has moved on. But when we look back on those things, we think like, okay, I can see what I've learned from that. Or I can understand why my parents didn't want me to do that. Or, whatever it is. So I think that sometimes in my life, honestly, I think a lot of times it's because I have something to learn. There's a lesson that I need to learn. And I think that I learn best by doing and making the mistakes on my own, so that I learn the lessons on my own. And so in that kind of broad question and answer, there's some key things that take place during the story, one of which is faith. Job has such an amazing faith. It's, even though he wrestles with God and he struggles with understanding what he's going through, he never renounces his faith. He never thinks that he's better off without God in his life. Now he does, he curses the day that he was born, which, I think that's pretty dramatic. But also, if everything happened to me that happened to Job, I would probably be feeling the same way, and I think that his faith is just such a strong statement. And obviously another key thing that happens in this story is suffering. There's a lot of suffering that takes place. Job literally has lost everything other than his life. Every earthly thing other than his life. And in the first chapter in my translation, it says that he was known to be one of the best men of his area. So to go from being this person that everyone looked up to, wanted to be, maybe not wanted to be, I don't know if people wanted to be him, but everything that he did was blessed by God. To then lose it all. And I don't know that it gives a timeline of how fast he lost it, but I've always read it as it happened fairly quickly. And so to lose all of that, even over a period of time, that's still a lot of loss, a lot of suffering. But especially if it was fast, I feel like there's only so much a person can handle. But I think that's the point. is that there's only so much a person can handle on their own. And another big thing that I think we see in the story is human understanding versus divine wisdom. So we can make up our own reasonings for things, or try to figure out the reasonings for things as much as we want to. A lot of times I feel like we're not going to know if we're right or not. And that's a hard pill for some of us to swallow. I am one of those people. But I think that I always have to remind myself that it's okay that I don't know. It's okay that I don't understand, because I trust God and I trust His will for my life. And I know that He's not going to steer me in the wrong direction. But as a person that likes to be in control, it's very hard to not understand why things are happening. Like, I feel like that with my mom getting cancer and all of the things that happened on a personal side right after we left Tennessee, while I was in Indiana, right before we left for Guam. And, it was like, this is supposed to be a time that I get to just spend with my family. The kids get to spend with their grandparents and aunts and uncles, and, that we get to just be. And then it turned into so much more than that. And not necessarily in a good way, I mean, we still got a lot of really great quality time with family, and I wouldn't trade it for anything. But, I mean, and my mom had this feeling too of like, almost like her being diagnosed with cancer was going to taint our time that was there. And it did change a few things, like, she didn't always feel the best, and she had to go to a lot of doctor's appointments, and I had to be careful with who I took the kids around when I took them places, So, I mean, there was a lot of added stressors, I guess, to that whole situation. And I think that I won't ever understand why that happened, like, why it couldn't just be easy when we were making this move to follow God in the beginning. Like, we weren't being disobedient to Him. And so at first I was feeling like I was being punished almost. But obviously that doesn't make any sense. And I know now, looking back on it, that that's not the case. So I just, all of that to say, my human understanding of all of that happened, and a lot of other things that happened, that not just that, but just a lot of things that happen in my life, is wrong, or I just have no understanding of it. But there's always divine wisdom, and the divine wisdom is always correct because it comes from God. So yeah, I think that for me, I feel like that's my biggest takeaway from Job. Like, the question was asked a lot, what would you be missing out on if the Bible didn't include the book of Job? And I think that's what I would be missing out on. A story of a person who, obviously, other than Jesus, I don't know of any others off the top of my head, but the story of a man who was upright and blameless, who went through all of the suffering for no reason that we can understand as humans, But there was a reason. There was a point, just like there is a reason and a point to everything that happens in our lives. And he stayed faithful to God. And God knew that he would. I mean, I don't understand why God would just bring him up to Satan when Satan wasn't bringing him up himself. But maybe he would have, if God would have let him keep talking. I mean, I don't know. It's another thing. I don't know, but God knows. But I do firmly believe that God sends us tests on this earth. In a lot of different ways, right? I mean, test of faith, test of patience, test of willpower, basically everything. Like, we have tests every day. We have trials every day. Most days I feel like they're just little things here and there, like taking a deep breath, not yelling at your kids when you've had to tell them something 16 times and they don't listen. That's a trial. That is a test of your patience. And then other times they're big things. They're big things, like tests of faith, I feel like, are big things. Tests of obedience, I feel like, are usually big things. But all of them feel different, to different people. So I do think that it's really important to humble ourselves when we are in a time of trial. Well, really all the time. It's important to humble ourselves and give up our plan and give up our ways and just trust. Just trust that God's got it under control, because he does. He always has our best interest at heart, and we might not always agree with his way of getting us there, but he's always going to get us there. And honestly, if we would just do everything in the way that we wanted to, our lives would probably be, well, there's no probably about it. Our lives would be so much messier than what they would be if we were great about always following God's will. But we have free will. He gave us the gift of free will. So I feel like sometimes you follow, sometimes you choose your own path, but the outcome is going to be the same in the end. I think that Job is one of those stories of the Old Testament that kind of foreshadow Jesus. Like, he is a righteous man who received something that he didn't deserve. And obviously the stories aren't exactly similar, but I always think of it being kind of a foreshadowing to Jesus. Yeah. I don't know that for a fact that it's supposed to be a foreshadowing, so I'm not gonna talk a whole lot on that. I need to research that more to make sure that I'm saying the correct thing. Yeah. So that's really all that I have to say about Job for tonight. But it's a good book. If you haven't read it, go read it. I would recommend having a commentary or something on the side to help you understand it. The Bible Project is good. The Bible Recap, I think Tara Lee Cobble does a great job of explaining what's happening throughout the story. And that's on the Bible app and I think it's on Spotify and maybe YouTube as well. So I would recommend having something to go along with it. But I think that it's a great book to read. It's a very powerful book. And I think it's one that people either like are fine with reading or dread reading. Yeah. I would leave you with a little bit of a challenge today, and just ask you to, it's more of a question, I guess, but it's also kind of a challenge. When you are going through hard things in your life, whether they are small hard things or really big hard things, how do you respond to God in those moments? What do you think happens to your faith during those seasons of hard? I think that's a very difficult question to answer. I think that it's a humbling question to answer, and I hope that you all can take something away from this vlog and figure out the areas where you're doing pretty good and the areas where you can use a little bit of work, because there's both of those in all of our lives. So thank you guys for joining me today, and I will see you on the next one. Love you. Bye.